Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Conor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is Phil Mackenzie. And for those who don't know, if you're hearing this right now, you probably do know. But spread the word. This will be our first episode not featured on BloodyElbow.com. And, well, joke's on them because we're talking about the biggest card of the year. This should be taking place on the Conor Ruebusch YouTube channel and all of that, but the big story is obviously the story of this episode. That's UFC 229, Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. And if you thought the main event was compelling, Phil, tell them about the undercard.
No. Let's talk about the main event instead.
Yeah, good idea. We will be getting to some of the undercard of this card later on in today's episode. But, there's a reason we're talking about the main event first. And there's also a reason we'll probably spend another half hour waffling around deciding what the hell to say after we finish talking about the main event. But the main event is undeniably compelling. Conor McGregor making his return after, all the bus attack and all of that shit, after losing to Mayweather. And I think he's been away from the sport of MMA for about 2 years now. And he's taking on Khabib Nurmagomedov, undefeated wrestler / grappler, from a part of Russia that isn't quite Russia, Phil, you were saying before we started that what makes this fight compelling, and I fully agree, is that it's got a simple narrative that anyone can understand. That you don't have to know who Khabib Nurmagomedov is. It sucks for you if you don't. His fights have certainly been very compelling to watch. But you don't have to know who he is if you just hear someone say, Conor McGregor is coming back, all right? You know who that is. And he's facing a guy who's never been beaten and who is going to try his utmost to take him down and beat him up on the ground. And either that happens or McGregor knocks him out. That's the very, very simple narrative. Did I more or less get that right?
Yep. And so, this is a narrative. So, one of the things which makes fights, big fights, is that they're narratives, they have narratives that people can get invested in emotionally. Mm-hmm. With, for example, Mayweather-McGregor, it was, can this guy who keeps saying he can do the impossible again? With this one, the narrative is a bit more subtle than that. It's not going to be as popular as Mayweather-McGregor was, but it's still a fight where if you've come into it with a particular bias, like you really like Conor McGregor, or I'm not going to say you really like Khabib Nurmagomedov, because the more likely answer is you really don't like Conor McGregor, mm-hmm. and you would like to see him get fucked up. This is a great fight for you, because in either one of those scenarios, you can see a clear way in which it can happen.
Yeah.
And the way that you see this fight happening is exactly the same way that pretty much everyone sees this fight. It doesn't really matter what kind of level of technical analysis you bring to this fight. In some ways, the basic dimensions of it remain the same. Either Khabib gets takedowns or Conor fucks him up on the feet. And
so thanks for listening to this week's episode of Heavy Hands. We'll catch you next week with the recap. Yeah, it's the perfect fight, right? Because it has made us obsolete. Our job is no longer necessary. It was already tragically unnecessary before, but boy, does it feel pointless now. We can't tell you anything about this fight.
Obviously there are lots of interesting things to look for.
Yeah.
Because the question is not necessarily just, what's the main... it has a central dynamic to it, but there's also a number of, technical and tactical interplays with, how do these particular things come out? But in the end, the thing is that one of the interesting things is that neither of these are flawless fighters. Mm-hmm. They may be, at least 2 out of the 3 of the consensus best lightweights in the world, and we'll be talking about the third one later. But they both have, clear They both have some clear flaws to their game, and they're both well equipped to exploit those flaws in the other guy.
Yeah, it's the original question that it seems like MMA was designed to answer, and we still haven't answered it conclusively enough. So here we are trying again, grappler versus striker, and that really is like that's. It's not the long of it. It could go a lot longer. God, fans of this show know we could go on a lot longer, but that is the short of it, and the short of it is substantively about as good as the long version. So yeah, that's why it's a saleable fight. People are going to buy this fucking card, no matter how shitty and uninteresting the undercard is, and we're probably getting shittier as we actually approach the date of the event. Fingers crossed nothing happens to the main event, because without it, this card does not exist. But yeah, so let's get into the dynamics, right? Because, as you said...
this is not just striker versus grappler, though. This is, perhaps this is one of the very best strikers we've ever seen in the sport of MMA. In some respects, he is the best. And, perhaps one of the best grapplers we've ever seen in the sport. It is, it's not just something that people can enjoy because it's got a kind of meme quality to it, but it is, like, incredibly fascinating.
Yeah, it's the classic question with higher stakes than ever. And as you said, like, both of these guys have obvious flaws. They are both extreme specialists, and it's really hard to be any kind of specialist without having some glaring flaw in your game, in this sport anyway. But not only are they flawed in their own ways, they are such specialists that the vast majority of both of their fights, on both of their records, I should say, are them dominating their opponents. So again, like, it's not just striker versus grappler. It is, as you said, the best, most dangerous striker versus the best, most dangerous grappler. And I did point this out before, but it's maybe worth repeating. Like, you can say, if you want to nitpick me saying they tend to dominate their opponents, I know there are exceptions. But the trouble is, in analyzing this matchup, the exceptions don't really tell you too much about how this fight will play out, because Khabib may have looked surprisingly flat against the likes of Pat Healy and Gleison Tibau, big, strong wrestlers that he had trouble really outmatching in that phase. But that's not Conor McGregor, and nor is Khabib Nurmagomedov, Nate Diaz or Joe Duffy or anyone. He's sure as hell not Floyd Mayweather, no matter what you may have believed after the Al Iaquinta fight. So, tough one. Tough nut to crack. Let's go ahead and get into, like, both of these guys are fast starters. So, like, let's go ahead and get into basically the possibilities of what could happen in the early stages of the fight. That's where things are going to be most interesting. I think we can probably both agree from the start that the longer this fight goes on, the worse Conor's chances are, right?
Yeah.
He's just one of these fighters has stamina issues and one of them doesn't. And that's a simple truth. So we can start there. But that being said, the beginning portion of the fight is still going to be exceptionally dangerous for Khabib, more than they have been against any other striker he has recklessly pressured into finally getting a takedown. So what might we see in the opening minutes of this matchup?
So, I mean, the question here is, what kind of approach do we see from Khabib? Mm-hmm. Because he is thought of as being a kind of recklessly aggressive fighter. But as you mentioned, sort of not directly, but we've seen a couple of fights where he's been more of a counter fighter. He is a very clever fighter. He has an exceptional analytical mind. He does understand that there have been certain matchups where it behooves him to read the approach and to go for a kind of counter-striking style. So, I mean, even in his most recent matchup against Al Iaquinta, he didn't take too many risks. He actually spent much of the first round kind of backed up to the fence, waiting for Iaquinta to overcommit. So I think that's sort of the first question from Khabib, is that how much risk does he want to spend getting into range against Conor?
And even a lot of his performances we think of as being marked by pressure, he starts most of his fights, you might say, with a more passive sort of on his bike approach.
Yeah. So this was something that apparently Edson Barboza was counting on. that he was going to have some time to be able to set up on. He was going to have some time to set up on Khabib, and Khabib simply just bum rushed him instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. Which was also a good example of Khabib's analytical mind, because that was almost certainly the exact right thing to do against a guy like Barboza, who does not like being pressured.
Yeah. So the main issue here is a very significant one, which I think I mentioned before the show, which is that Conor McGregor is perhaps the single fastest starter that we've ever seen in MMA. And by that, I don't mean someone who comes out of the gate throwing tons of strikes and being hyper-aggressive like Prime Wanderlei Silva. I mean, he is someone who has a deep technical game that is pretty much 100% intact from the opening bell.
Yeah.
Anderson Silva, for example, he generally took time to set up his counter shots. Mm-hmm. Jose Aldo, like most of these extremely skilled fighters need some time to feel their opponents out before they're really ready to go. They only really start to show how good they are in the second round or the third round. Conor McGregor is almost instantaneously at 100% efficiency. If he has badly fucked up pretty much everyone he has ever fought in the first round.
Yeah. I can't think of a better example than the Jose Aldo fight, where we can talk about Aldo. Everyone talked about Aldo. That sure did bug me now that I think of it. Everybody mocked Aldo, or like, who goes in there and throws a leaping left hook? Who else is going to precisely counter and knock out Jose Aldo if that is his first strike?
Literally no one.
No one. No one has access to their skill set as immediately as McGregor does. The moment he looks at you and the bell rings, he's ready to do all the things he is capable of doing. I think that's the point you're making.
So here's the question for Khabib, is if he is aggressive, he has a problem. And this is that his footwork is not terribly good. He's very fast, but he tends to have a terrible tendency to follow his opponents around the cage.
Yeah. Pressure for him
he follows them very, very quickly, but he turns and follows. He does not cut his opponents off.
Yeah. And
we can see in some of his fights, McGregor is both good at offensively forcing people into bad angles by kind of stepping into the cross as they kind of step away from him to get away from, he kind of punches them down the line of the fence. But he's also actually, we saw in the Diaz fight that he's also very good at drawing people to follow him and then punching them as they kind of step across their own feet.
Mm-hmm.
So this means, if Khabib wants to pressure, and he basically needs to line up a takedown like a missile lock, he needs to do that without following McGregor and without as McGregor circles off and without turning onto a counter shot.
Yeah.
And conversely, if he goes for the kind of defensive RDA kind of game plan, the kind of game plan he used against RDA and Healy, he goes for a kind of counter game plan to beat pressure. He's not a very good defensive striker, and I suspect that he's perhaps not. He doesn't have the same grasp of kind of rhythm that McGregor does. And again, like McGregor is, as well as being incredibly fast starting, perhaps one of the very worst fighters to be trapped up against the cage against. Yeah. Like
long ass arms, insane accuracy. Yeah. But here's the thing. Like, it's really easy because the fight starts on the feet. We're thinking about all the ways that there's an extremely slim margin for error for Khabib. The trouble is say McGregor fucks up one of those counter left hands. Say Khabib does fight aggressively, and McGregor misses or just doesn't get the finish on one left hand and it leads to a tie-up. Even if and this is a big question. Is McGregor's wrestling good enough to not get taken down by Khabib? I think a lot of people would be inclined to say no. Even a lot of people picking McGregor seem to be banking on him to just KO Khabib before any grappling can occur, which again is possible. But you mess up one of those, and that is almost the whole fight gone for a guy like McGregor, from my perspective. Because at the very least, he is going to have to expend a lot of energy to keep from being taken down. And as we said, like, one of the only clear truths of this matchup is that McGregor gets tired and Khabib does not.
Yeah, I mean, it's so... From my perspective, like, I feel like sometimes these particular dynamics are somewhat overplayed. So, and this is because of the general grappler dynamic, right? Is that if you are a dominant grappler, you can really only have one-sided fights. This is sort of the way that it goes. You can't, because either you're getting your chains of grappling techniques going, or you're not. And if you're not, you're probably not going to be winning very much. Like, so I think when people see Khabib, people would be very mad if I compare him to Ronda Rousey, because he is obviously a far, far better fighter than Ronda Rousey, but he is also someone who is fighting in a much, much better division than Ronda Rousey was.
Know that I understand exactly what you're getting at when you make that comparison.
Yeah, but it's the fact that, like, so Rousey against Holm, people said, you know, Holm can probably land shots on Rousey. She's not defensively not very good, but there's no way she can finish her, and unless she, you know, takes the risk of going for a big head kick, and you know, other than that, she's just going to get taken down. And you know, whilst it's still is fashionable to hate on Rousey, you know, she is a infinitely more dynamic ground fighter for her division than Khabib was. She was much more of a finishing threat, right? There was the idea then that if Rousey gets you down, this is instant death.
Yeah.
Khabib's takedowns are merely a round gone.
Doesn't that make it worse?
You're probably going to be very tired.
Doesn't that make it worse though? Because if Ronda gets you down and can't get the armbar, where's her mind going? If Khabib gets you down and doesn't finish you, just another day in the office. He's still got you down. He's just going to work.
Yeah, but say we do have, you know, some kind of competitive fight. Say he gets fucked up and then he gets a takedown.
Okay,
right?
Yeah.
You know, and they both stand and they both get up afterwards, and Khabib's like, "Wow, that punch really hurt." That guy has large hands.
Yeah.
And you know, and he's a bit more conservative. I mean, this is the thing, is that I don't know, like, the dynamic of this guy has to knock the other guy out or else it's over. Like, you can get really badly compromised really quickly if you're outclassed on the feet.
That is very true.
You can be, you know, you can suddenly look quite bad. And like I said, the dynamic of Holly Holm being a feather-fisted decision machine and Ronda Rousey being an incredibly dynamic finisher who was going to take her out if she got her to the ground instantaneously. These things weren't totally untrue, but the fight went downhill so fast once she had issues getting to once Rousey had issues getting to home. And again, like, I'm not saying Khabib is Ronda Rousey. He is defensively. I said he wasn't great, but he's defensively infinitely better than Ronda Rousey is, and you know,
he's not that striker,
better. You know, this is he's incomparably better. Please don't flame me over the internet.
The point stands. The essential point stands. You know, I'll say, like, I just don't know. I guess I'm thinking too myopically now because of the comparison you made, right? I'm thinking, like, well, a lot of Holmes' success in that fight seemed like she had a couple very specific moves that shut down Ronda's whole takedown game and likewise the armbar threat that flows off of it. And does something like that exist for Khabib? But the point still stands that, like, Yeah, striking is unlike grappling. Striking is like by nature back and forth. If two guys of reasonably similar level, so like you don't think that a guy who's beating people up on the feet looks quite as dominant as Khabib looks in his fights, but it's because Khabib is literally holding people down. Whereas like as no matter who you are, you spend time on the feet, you're probably gonna eat some shots. But I mean, here's the thing too, that McGregor is exceptionally dangerous early. That accuracy, the readiness to go right from the first bell. But to a lesser extent, that is true of someone like Michael Johnson. And Khabib, for all the lacking footwork and everything, we know his pressure works when it works because of proximity and momentum. If he gets you moving backwards, he will try to keep you moving backwards. And he will do that by just staying as close to you as possible, essentially. Close enough to make you throw. And that's the other concern, is that McGregor does have to hit Khabib to ward off the grappling attack. He has to throw. So if Khabib is good enough, if he can do what he did against Johnson, sort of step in, step out, step in, step out. Now, obviously, much trickier. McGregor's better accuracy, quicker hands, much longer arms. But McGregor still has to, maybe it's too risky for Khabib to make him fight like that.
Yeah, so I've mostly been kind of talking up. I've mostly sort of been talking up McGregor in the fight, but yeah, there are a couple of significant advantages that Khabib has. Not necessarily advantages, but just
It keeps coming back to the stamina thing for me in my head.
I mean, this it's not just stamina; it's the fact that Khabib is a better athlete than McGregor in almost every metric.
Yeah,
like he is. This is again perhaps a slightly hot take. I don't think Conor McGregor is actually a tremendously good athlete. I don't think he's really that strong or that fast or explosive or much of like any of the traditional metrics of athleticism. He is just a marvelously accurate and naturally heavy-handed puncher. Like this is pretty much, and he's just he has a frame that is incredibly well built for MMA and a mind that's well made for it. But I think that Khabib would wreck him on every conceivable athletic metric.
In the ways we usually understand athleticism, Khabib is more like Yoel Romero than Conor McGregor is, for sure. Yeah.
And that's just the thing, is that if Khabib gets his hands on him, that is one of the things that would change that fight very quickly.
Yeah.
He's just stronger and can overcome more. He might even be more durable. We haven't even really seen, but they both take a hell of a shot. And the other thing is that McGregor doesn't take is that once McGregor fires his counter shots, he is not the best at at resetting and throwing and getting back out again.
He puts himself out of position every time he throws that left hand. Yeah, just like Michael Johnson.
He is. It's like a shotgun blast, and he needs time to reload it, and he doesn't have tremendous defensive footwork to be able to do that. So a lot of his issues are about being. He has issues when he is confined in space. The Diaz fight is very well defined in terms of being a spatial story. McGregor wins easily whenever Diaz is backed into the fence. The minute McGregor gets forced behind the black lines in that fight, he kind of resorts to that weird moving his head, bobbing around, trying to, do this sort of visually impressive looking running away thing. And Diaz just pounces on him and fucks him up.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing was true of, same thing was true in the Mayweather fight. Mayweather realized that once you get this guy to throw, once that left hand is gone, he is extremely defensively vulnerable. He doesn't have he doesn't have tremendous defense. He doesn't really have tremendous defensive footwork once the left hand is out there. He tends to, lose his stance, kind of turn and run in a lot of cases. It's confined in space. When the left hand is thrown, he is significantly more vulnerable.
And that's where the anxiety comes out too. That's where the gassing originates, is once he realizes that he doesn't, like, when he's not in control, then he starts to fall apart.
I think it's also just that insane focus that allows him to be so quick out of the gates is just incredibly difficult to maintain.
Sure.
Something that, like I said, no one else can really do. And I just don't think that anyone can keep that up for that amount of time.
We compare combat sports to chess a lot, and I'm always quick to say it's more like speed chess. Like you just don't have time to think. Speed chess with dire consequences, blah blah blah, whatever pithy thing you want to say. But if anyone's ever played speed chess, like bullet chess or blitz chess, play 3 games in a row. You will be fucking mentally exhausted. It's really hard. And I think you're right. Like, McGregor. Like, I remember in the Pat Wyman era, Pat also talked about how good McGregor, like, explaining his accuracy in terms of being able to make small adjustments to his strikes mid-strike. Mm-hmm. And all of that is like, it must be exhausting. So like, McGregor's effectiveness. That's why I just have to come back to Khabib for this. It's like, in order to be effective, McGregor has to. It's always a gambit with McGregor, and I guess it's a gambit of sorts with Khabib if he's pressuring and he's in there. He's going to be putting himself at risk. But I just feel like Khabib's success will deteriorate McGregor. McGregor's success will deteriorate McGregor. In the aggregate, it feels like Khabib just has more of those like little small advantages you look for. So I think I'm going to go with Khabib for this one. I guess it's time to make picks, but we've been at this for like 27 minutes, so it's a tricky thing. It's a lot of fun to talk about because it's got so many unknowns, but at the end of the day, we have spent 27 minutes telling you one of these guys is going to try to take the other down, and if he does, he'll probably win. The other guy is going to try and outstrike him, and he very well may do that, and if he does, he'll win.
So I think I'm gonna side with McGregor.
All right.
I mean, the thing is that Khabib is marvelously quick and incredibly powerful. I'm not sure what his entry game really is. He doesn't really have the crouching jab or the overhand right. He just sort of strikes really fast and enthusiastically, or goes for a takedown. So I'm not sure how he enters in on McGregor. So I can't see a way in which he doesn't get quite badly hurt in the first round. And again, he's a very smart guy, so maybe he's seen something that I haven't. And in these kind of matches, sometimes that's just enough. Like, what if McGregor just either knocks Khabib out or builds up a huge lead? Like, what does that do to Khabib's confidence? In general, like, I feel like big success early is often underrated in these kind of matchups because it fucks you up, like getting punched and beaten up. And so I think I'm going to go with McGregor, and he's still a ridiculous finisher. So, but I think Khabib is obviously incredibly tough. So like, I think Khabib might get in trouble and might be able to pull something back out. But I think maybe he'll just have taken too much damage by that point. So maybe like a McGregor third round knockout.
Third round knockout. Is this the same Conor McGregor
I'm just
we're talking
ambitious.
about?
I just want some cool stuff to happen. It would really suck. I have to say. I mean, it wouldn't suck. It would still be interesting to see. But if it really does turn out to be just Khabib just gets a takedown and just fucks Conor up for 15 minutes, or Conor just does the Jose Aldo thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really want to see that. So I'm hoping for something back and forth and something cool.
It would be
something
letdown.
Something a bit like Mendes McGregor, whichever way it goes. That's just all I'm hoping for.
It would be a letdown. We were saying before we began this discussion that like you made the point that there aren't that many tremendously exciting fights of this kind, the striker versus grappler paradigm. The best case scenario is probably something like McGregor Mendes or Jędrzejczyk Gadelha 2, where we get to see both fights happening and the interplay between them. So yeah, I would also be a little disappointed if one guy just got sunned by the other. But I still think that's why these guys' mutual domination of their respective opponents is what makes this so interesting, because, I don't know, these just aren't guys that get dominated. So I have a feeling we will still see some interesting things happen, even if the first round goes decisively one way or the other. So, all right, that's McGregor versus Khabib. We've talked about this shit for half an hour, and thank goodness, because I don't know if we could get that much time out of the rest of this card. But when we come back, we're going to get on to the co-main event, Pretty Tony versus Ugly Tony. Tony Ferguson is taking on Anthony Pettis, and then some other shit is happening. All of that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Welcome back to Heavy Hands, and now we are on to the co-main event of UFC 229. As mentioned before, Ugly Tony takes on Pretty Tony, and Phil, I think you summed this one up perfectly. It'll be fun, and I believe I heard you shrug as you said it.
It's going to be pretty good. I mean,
it's going to be fun.
It's going to be
no matter
awesome.
what.
Like it will be violent. Yeah, it will be violent and it will be exciting. And one major reason, which is Anthony Pettis is back, Connor. Anthony Pettis is back.
He is back from vacation.
You saw him beat a grappler in his last fight.
Yeah,
I think he's solved his problems. I think
yeah,
that all those issues he had against wrestlers like
Edson Barboza.
Yeah, like Edson Barboza, the blue collar bruiser, and hard-headed Holloway. All these Division I wrestlers who have troubled him in the past.
Yeah,
I think he's got the solution to them now, and it's to tap them out off his back.
Man, what if he fought Lunch Pail Lando Venata?
Yeah,
be really in for a wrestling then, but no, now he solved it. Yeah. So Anthony Pettis is one of those great examples of, much like Vanderlei Silva last weekend against Rampage Jackson, who he's essentially like, yes, he's getting older. Yes, he's easier to injure. Yes, he probably can't maintain the same pace he used to. All those things, that he's getting older, so he is changing. But essentially, he is the same as he's ever been. And the game just kind of caught up to him at a certain point. But all the old matchups against which he used to be super dangerous, I think he's still super dangerous against them. And you mentioned you mentioned Conor McGregor's insanely quick starts. Is Tony Ferguson as much the opposite of that as you can possibly be, Phil? Is he the slowest starter in the UFC?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a historical fighter, like an elite level fighter who was this bad in the first round compared to how he was in rounds 2 onwards. The only one I can think of is maybe like prime early UFC, late WEC Donald Cerrone, for someone who was so clearly guaranteed to lose the first round.
Yeah. Yeah, and even then, like, man, Ferguson's got fucked up in some of his bad first rounds. I guess I'm really thinking of the Lando Venata one, but likewise against Michael Johnson. He's gotten
So let's talk about these two guys. So Pretty Tony, tremendous dynamic kicker, amazing scrambler, incredibly tough, keeps pretty good pace, completely empty with regards to his offense in the clinch, mediocre footwork, keeps his head up high up in the air, and gets backed into the cage easily. And then we've got Tony Ferguson, insanely aggressive, keeps a ridiculous pace, dog shit in the first round. So basically the question is in this one is that Tony Ferguson is a complete nightmare style matchup for Anthony Pettis, with the one exception that Anthony Pettis is a ferocious fight ender and that Tony Ferguson is simply an insane heavy bag for one round. So the question in this one, it has an odd dynamic, a bit like the first fight, but simply a much more, a lot like the main event, but in a weird way, much more pronounced. That this is really a fight where, Anthony Pettis, I think, as I've said, I think the Conor has to knock Khabib out in one round, otherwise he's toast narrative is overplayed. I don't think it is here. I think Anthony Pettis really has to knock Tony Ferguson out in one round.
Yeah. I don't know. He could do what Jamie Tony did in 2009 and submit. No, that happened in the first round. Yeah, that's the thing. Nobody beats Ferguson after the first round. And very few people who beat him in the first round beat him in a fight anyway.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it doesn't feel very good for Anthony Pettis to me. Despite all of the openings he will be given. I have yet to see those openings really destroy Tony Ferguson, and usually he gets smarter as the fight goes on too. It's not just that he's tough and then he keeps doing what he's doing. He kind of sucks in the first round. He's got a really unique kind of slow. This is why my pet theory has been for a while now that Tony Ferguson badly needs contacts. It just seems like he can't tell how far away his opponent is, or what strikes are going to hit him. He has defensive reactions in his arsenal, he can make reads and slip, and he can counter, and he can do any number of weird things, and he's insanely creative. But he just can't see shit coming in the first round. Likewise, he's not very dangerous himself in the first round, because he's such an open target that even when he does try to attack, he's not confident enough in placing his shots to not just get the worst of almost every exchange if he just decides to be aggressive. So I don't know. Could Anthony Pettis finish him in the first round? I'm kind of talking myself into it. It seems eminently possible, but I just haven't seen it happen yet.
So the main thing that puts this, that kind of defeats this, the main reason why I am fairly confident in this is the Edson Barboza fight, because Edson Barboza beat Tony Ferguson up in the first round.
Yeah.
But he didn't do it with kicks. And he didn't do it with kicks because he didn't have the time and the space.
Yeah.
Because Tony Ferguson, again, and we mentioned that Khabib is a pretty smart fighter. Tony Ferguson, in his own way, in his own completely nuts way, is actually a really smart fighter. Mm-hmm. He's a really underrated, I think. He has underrated fight IQ.
As I said, he doesn't just keep doing the thing that got him fucked up in the first round to beat people. We're not just looking at someone who's just inexorable. He adjusts. That's why he can be such a consistently terribly slow starter and still win almost all of his fights. He's a very good adaptive fighter.
But he understands the basics. He understands, the fundamentals of, how to draw people into, so I think he said something to Daryl Horcher after he fought, when I think he was tweeting about Daryl Horcher when he was fighting Khabib. He was like, yeah, he understands what to do, force Khabib out, draw out the shot, and then counter. He understood that this is how you beat a wrestler, and he knows how to beat a kicker, and that's that you stay on him. So he was able to spend one round, basically getting boxed up by Edson Barboza. But it didn't matter because Barboza couldn't get his kicks off.
Yeah.
So if Ferguson just bum rushes Pettis, as I suspect he will, he might get actually, Pettis is not a bad puncher. Like this is something which is often underplayed, that he has, he's a poor boxer, therefore he's a bad puncher. He has a very, he's a fast, accurate jab and cross.
Yeah,
he just doesn't have much else.
Yeah.
He doesn't move his head, he doesn't parry, he doesn't have good footwork. But so if Ferguson just goes after him, as I suspect he is smart enough to do, and just stays on him, he'll get tagged up a bunch. But also, Pettis just will not be able to throw his kicks in the way that he wants to. And essentially, kind of all Ferguson has to do is just get out of that first round without giving Pettis the space to kick him in the head.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, will Pettis tire? But he does tire, but he's got some good third round. But really, nobody tires. No one is as tireless as Tony Ferguson. That has to be understood. Not even somebody like Rafael dos Anjos, who has insanely good cardio, outlasted Tony Ferguson, really. And yeah, I do want to emphasize, despite the Pettis, he's how dangerous he is with his hands is certainly underrated. Which is why he got away with just backing himself into the fence, squaring his feet, but looking to hit you with the right hand for such a long time. It worked against Gilbert Melendez, who's a pretty good fighter. It worked just fine. But the issue is, he's not as good a boxer as Edson Barboza. Certainly not. I mean, one fight in particular seems to bear that statement out.
Indeed.
Yeah, he's not going to do what Edson did to take that first round from Tony. He's not going to be hitting the body and throwing short combinations of hooks and uppercuts. He's not going to be pivoting, certainly. We know he can't do that. And resetting constantly to create new space to fill with more combinations of punches. And if you can't do that, you can probably hit Ferguson with that right hand, but I don't know, there's going to be a lot of shit coming back at you. But, I mean, are you fairly confident that that's how Tony Ferguson will approach him? Because if he doesn't, it would be really, really dangerous in the first round. That is exactly the kind of matchup in which Pettis could finish him, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I trust all of those. I trust all of those guys at the very top of the lightweight division to beat relatively limited fighters like Pettis by knowing what to do. I mean, that's why Barboza has been the test for all of them. So Kevin Lee, Khabib and Ferguson, they all understood, for example, Kevin Lee, perhaps not the most comfortable pressure fighter, but he knew exactly what he had to do. Mm-hmm. And I think Ferguson knows exactly what he has to do. He knows where Pettis is dangerous. I mean, there's still serious risk there, because if Pettis just does stand his ground and just tries to kick Ferguson in his head as hard as he feasibly can, I am in no way guaranteeing that's not going to work.
Mm-hmm. Or just immediately meets him with a straight right from longish range as he comes forward. He could rock Tony Ferguson with the first punch. That seems extremely possible. He just immediately sets his feet and hits him with a straight right hand. Yeah.
So it makes it fascinating in some ways. In the same sort of as mentioned, a weird, bizarro mirror of the main event. It's a incredibly dynamic finisher who isn't really great at much, who isn't really a great round winner or anything else, against someone who is a crippling style matchup for him, who is nonetheless perhaps the slowest starter in MMA.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to pick Ferguson, and probably by some kind of late finish.
Yeah, Ferguson is also quite the finisher in his own right.
Yeah, but yeah, keep your eye out.
Yeah, I think you got the dynamic right there. As long as that is how Ferguson approaches it, he turns that into the same matchup he had with Barboza, but against a worse version of Barboza.
Just as long as he doesn't go for crazy takedowns and try and wacky scrambles on Pettis, because that is also, as many have found out,
yes,
just not the way to beat him.
Yeah, it's worth saying that Barboza, a worse matchup a worse first round than Barboza was able to give, but particularly more dangerous when trying to take him down. Pettis' submission game is obviously still on point. So
yeah, one more thing to reference is that and this is just a general note of caution, is that weird guys tend to be good at beating up weird guys. Like, that
kind of explains the whole sport of MMA, Phil.
Yeah, but one of the things that has gotten to Pettis has been brutal application of fundamentals most of the time. Just sticking on top, just taking the shortest line. Going unconventional against him has traditionally been a death sentence. If you think of guys like Benson Henderson and Michael Chiesa, right? They've got janky games, well put together, functional, but essentially unconventional. And he's very happy in these kind of situations. He can read if you want to be unpredictable. So again, that's another point to recognize. If Tony Ferguson tries for something crazy, there's especially early on, there's just a significant chance that Pettis is just like, this is exactly the thing that he loves.
God, I wouldn't complain.
It's a terrible style matchup in general.
I wouldn't complain if they just traded the craziest moves they could think of for a round.
Yeah,
that would be fun. I have to go with Tony as well. Like, I don't know.
You have to go with Tony.
the one who calls himself Tony. Yeah, I got to go with Ferguson as well. It is real tempting, just to be contrarian and pick Pettis, though, because if you want to pick him,
just make sure you get that prop.
Yeah, no, I will not pick him. I've chickened out on all of my greatest "I told you so" moments. Come after I've told somebody all the reasons why they should have picked this person, and then agree with them and pick the other guy. So I'm sure as hell not going to pick Pretty Tony in this one, on the slim chance that he can do what no one else has done and finish Ferguson in one of his terrible first rounds. But we shall see. It's hard not to go for Ferguson, though. And that's probably enough for the second segment. When we come back, we will address the rest of this main card. We've got, brace yourselves, OSP versus Dominic Reyes. Need I say more? Then we've got Derek Lewis.
Apparently we do need to say more.
Derek Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. Yeah, we'll say more about that one as well. And we both feel that Michelle Waterson, Felice Herrig may be a little predictable, so we will probably, if we have time, just say a few words about Sergio Pettis versus Jussier Formiga, a legitimate contenders kind of fight in the flyweight division, which is particularly interesting now that the champion is different, right? So new narratives, new avenues opening up there. We'll get to all of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. Let's jump right in. The rest of the main card of UFC 229 laid out before us here. Ovince St. Preux is holding the gates against Dominic Reyes. And Phil,
It's time.
Yeah?
Is it time for light heavyweight to depress us again?
Is it time? The question is, do you have to pick OSP against a guy like Dominic Reyes? This is a circumstance we have seen many times before, right? This is essentially the UFC model for developing prospects. And that's only more true now that half of their divisions are blasted wastelands where they are in desperate need of contenders and prospects. But Dominic Reyes has obliterated most all, I believe, of his opponents. He had one third-round decision, if I remember correctly. But other than that, he had his entire 9-fight career has been first-round finishes. And the UFC fucking loves fighters like that. Dana White gets absolutely in a tizzy when he sees someone who has only had 6 fights but finished all of them in the first round. He loves nothing more than to sign those fighters. But what always happens is they come into the UFC, they're invariably in a division like light heavyweight or middleweight or somewhere else that sucks, and they just blow up the first couple of people they fight. Even people who are regarded as being okay contender-ish type fighters like Jared Cannonier, which is who Dominic Reyes beat in his last fight. Like, how much does it really mean to beat a guy like Jared Cannonier? So eventually what it means is that the Reyes character, the much hyped prospect, immediately gets thrown in there with one of the legitimate contenders in that division. Not that OSP doesn't perfectly fit the light heavyweight bill of weird fighters who aren't actually very good, but Dominic Reyes has never beaten anybody who is as uniquely not good as OSP. So like we have a ton of unknowns for a Reyes, who is admittedly like a very dynamic looking and exciting striker, but like OSP is not easy to beat. He's insanely tough. He's weird. He has proven really decidedly difficult for a lot of strikers because he's got long arms and a lot of power, good timing, and he's just a phenomenal athlete too. So like it is in so many ways a tremendous step up for a fighter like Dominic Reyes. So do you have to pick OSP?
I kind of feel like I have to. And it makes me sad.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be
Because
nice to have a new prospect, a new contender?
Yeah, this is the thing, is that it just seems like we have to go through the prospects have to be beaten down so consistently that by the time they have their breakthrough moment, you just go, oh, yeah, I guess. So, I mean, the classic example here is Corey Anderson.
Is that? I thought Corey Anderson was following in the footsteps of Ryan Bader, I think.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the thing, is that like it's very difficult to get thrilled by, suddenly, like if Corey Anderson had beaten someone like Glover Teixeira much earlier in his career, you'd be, you might be like, wow, this guy, he's got pace, he's got wrestling. But at this point, yeah, you've just seen him kind of get bounced back so often that he just seems like another part of the light heavyweight scenery by this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to look at him and not just think, oh yeah, you can win a lot of fights and then maybe suddenly you'll just completely implode. So it seems like it's almost inevitable that every prospect seems to have at least one incredibly deflating bounce back. And so, I mean, and this is the thing, is that we have seen so little from Reyes, apart from the fact that he has dynamite in his hands. He's a really good kicker. His defense seems surprisingly okay. And he can grapple a bit as well, as we saw against Jeremy Kimball. Like, everything looks relatively promising.
It's
but
exactly
the question
kind of stuff
is, do you then assume that he could? Do you then assume that the rest of his game is intact, or do you just then assume that there are large gaps in it? Because, for example, if someone had said, would you pick Misha Cirkunov over OSP after he'd beaten Krylov or something, I'd be like, yeah, Krylov looks pretty decent, and Cirkunov has all the traits of a really impressive fighter, but that probably would have been wrong. He probably wouldn't have beaten OSP.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the thing, is that like it just seems like you have to assume, and Reyes is, it has to be mentioned, a particularly inexperienced light heavyweight prospect.
Mm-hmm.
He has been fighting for less than 4 years. And his competition has gone from absolute bottom of the barrel UFC light heavyweights to just Jared Cannonier, who he hurt really early. That's pretty much he's never fought any, and OSP, for whatever that's worth, is a top 10 light heavyweight. So, I mean, I just can't, as much as I like how Dominic Reyes' game looks, I can't trust him. I don't. Has he ever fought a competent southpaw? Does he have a busy enough gym that has competent southpaws around his size for him to even spar with?
Yeah.
Does he have any kind of gaps in his game? Because a lot of these guys, around 4 years into your career is when you have a well-developed regional grappling game. If he does things like pull guillotines in takedown situations, he's going to get von Flue choked.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of have to pick OSP, and it's bumming me out.
Yeah. There are a couple things that make this a little interesting to me. No one at light heavyweight has striking defense. And that is a big part of why, like, fighters as diverse as, I don't know, like Shogun Hua, super experienced striker, down to guys like, I don't know. God, this division sucks. Like Tyson Pedro. They all struggle with OSP because they might have obvious avenues in which it seems like they should outclass him, but he hits them on the way in. And there are a couple things. Reyes doesn't have to get in, so he's already a little more on the John Jones side of the spectrum, where maybe at that range they stall each other out a bit, but he's not easily hittable. At least he did not look so in the Cannonier fight. Now, as a tall guy who's very inexperienced, it's extremely likely that he does eat a shot, and suddenly his slick-looking defense evaporates because he's never faced somebody who can match his reach, hit him when he thinks he's safe, and so then how the fuck is he supposed to time his slips and his counters after that? That happens when you're really used to banking on your reach. But there's something there. Like, Reyes is not just a physical beast who has been destroying his opponents. He looks like he's got elements of a smart game. Distance management, defense that almost always comes with counters. Decent looking footwork. Sometimes it gets a little creative, I will say, to be kind, but it always like fulfills a purpose. He knows where he is in the cage and knows to take angles to get out of trouble, and he will change up direction to keep from being cornered. There's not a lot of variety or creativity to what OSP does on the feet. It's like, it's like a big left kick, but he is very tough. And what if Reyes just can't stop a takedown? Like, just can't stop a takedown from such a strong opponent. Yeah, you've got to pick OSP, right? Like, I feel compelled. There's something there. I would be so excited if Reyes went in there, had a fight in which we saw him tested, and still prevailed. I think he's capable. This is light heavyweight after all. But
yeah, I mean, and OSP is tough, but he's not unknockoutable.
Exactly.
And he doesn't have, he doesn't have the greatest defense or gas tank or.
And it's mostly like
takedown game,
one strike at a time. Yeah, like that's the thing. It is light heavyweight, so like it's just that all of the prospects we get excited about and then see crash and burn and plummet from the sky in flames are also light heavyweights. And I'm sure that as good as he looks, Dominic Reyes must be a light heavyweight in some way that we haven't seen yet. He's gonna pull a guillotine, as you said. Something is this. No one can be that good in this division. So if he beats OSP, it'll say a lot to me. I will officially get really, really excited for Dominic Reyes because I think OSP, like just at a glance comparing their records, OSP should be heavily favored over a guy like Reyes. It's like Reyes has fought no one, and OSP's record is just blue names almost all the way down. So. Yeah, going with OSP, siding with you on this one. I don't like it, though. All right, I am hardcore rooting for Dominic Reyes the more I think of it, because I need something to happen in this division that is good. So, fingers crossed for that. But let's get to the people's main event, Phil. Heavyweights, Derek Lewis and Alexander Volkov. What the hell do you make of this? Good start.
Alexander Volkov is going to throw jabs.
Yeah.
And Derek Lewis probably isn't. So I'm going to favor Alexander Volkov.
The only certainty
because of throwing jabs.
The only certainty that I see in this matchup is that Derek Lewis is going to eat a lot of jabs.
Uh-huh.
As you said, I'll bring this up because I think it's a particularly strong comparison. Volkov is literally just a heavyweight Alexander Gustafsson without the wrestling. He is almost exactly the same kind of fighter. He's tall and rangy. He uses his jab, and he throws a real good right uppercut.
And he has no defense.
He has no defense. He relies a lot on his toughness. Both Gustafsson and Volkov, really, really tough, especially given the divisions they fight in. But that's where things fall apart in analyzing this matchup, because Volkov is going to land a lot of jabs. He's got the reach, and Derek Lewis has probably never experienced a heavyweight who is not only bigger than him, but who actually does use his lead hand that much. But also, if Derek Lewis at any moment gets the idea to throw a big cross counter, he might obliterate Volkov.
This could be like a terrible comedic warped version of like Gus Rumble.
Terrible, warped, comedic. Yeah, it could. You know, like there's a lot of reasons to pick Volkov, but I picked Gustafsson against Rumble. And it turns out having no defense against a really infamously dangerous puncher is not a good look.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us thought Gustafsson was a much better striker than he in fact is. I think we're now a lot more cynical about light heavyweight, and rightfully so. Yeah. I mean, so there isn't much to say. Like, Lewis is, he's a very underrated kicker. He's obviously a tremendously powerful ground and pounder, but he doesn't really have the takedowns to go with it, and that's at least partially, I suspect, because his back just doesn't like going for takedowns. I mean, weirdly enough, he's in pressure situations, he's okay with just bench pressing people off him, but he's not really much of a takedown guy himself. So, yeah, and I'm not convinced that he's also very flat-footed. And so the main fight I tend to go back to with respect to that is him against Travis Brown. And just thinking, like, what if Travis Brown wasn't Travis Brown and didn't try and immolate himself on his opponent's greatest strength every time in the most comedic way possible?
Yeah.
What if he had just sat at range and peppered Derek Lewis forever?
What if he had just kept doing the thing that almost immediately won him the fight?
Yeah, that.
That's a good point. Yeah. Here's the thing. I don't think Volkov will do it either. At some point, he's going to come in and try to throw a big uppercut. Or he's going to come in and try to clinch Derek Lewis and hit him with clinch knees or something. You know, like, the opportunities are there. I don't know. I guess you could say the performance against Fabricio was very intelligent. He fought a very cautious and smart fight that time around. So, yeah, there's something there.
I mean, it sort of was, but it was really just he was just very active, and his ground game was much better than Verdum thought it was.
Yeah.
But and he was able to survive, and he just exhausted Verdum.
Yeah.
Like his cardio is great. Like that is genuinely impressive.
Yeah. No,
but yeah, I mean, so I think, you know, I think the most illustrative example is Brown on one end, and if like Volkov against Nelson, Roy Nelson on the other, because even slow Roy Nelson nowadays, I think, covers distance faster than Derek Lewis does. And Nelson and Volkov just kind of kept him at distance and peppered him, and he actually threw quite a lot of kicks. He just kept the kicks going to the midsection, mixed them up with jabs. I just think it's not a good matchup for. It's not something that Lewis has shown that he responds well to.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. It really just comes down to what many Derek Lewis fights come down to, which is one knockdown or fortuitous scramble, and anything that causes Volkov to get hurt and or puts Derek Lewis on top of him, it's probably over. But yeah, Lewis has been doing decidedly little to make that happen in some of his recent fights. Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Or ever. I mean, he's really not a particularly aggressive or quick or anything fighter. It's just tends to kind of happen at some point.
Yeah, well, that's the tricky thing in making predictions. It does tend to happen at some point. Yeah, I'll go with Volkov as well. At the very least, Volkov is tougher even than most heavyweights. At the very least, if there's somebody in this division who can afford to take a terrific shot from Derek Lewis and keep doing what he was doing, it's probably a guy like Volkov. So he's got that going for him. And that's about it. Do you want to quickly say a few words about Sergio Pettis, Jussier Formiga? I don't know. The trouble is it's a meaningful fight. It doesn't sound like it's going to be very fun to watch, though.
I'm always interested to see how Pettis does. He is, obviously the more skilled of the two brothers.
Undoubtedly.
He has really good footwork for this division.
Oh yeah.
Very clever at setting up his right hand and building up his jab and so on. But he's never quite had the functional wrestling defense to be able to make that quite work for him. But, only against, in recent years, that's only really been against Henry Cejudo. So it's one of those fights where you got to feel kind of bad for these two because the division has opened up. But it's opened up with the guy who's beaten both of them being champion and the guy who has never fought either one of them being dethroned. Mm-hmm. So, it's one of those ones where, oh, yeah, the division's opened up for everyone apart from you two. So they're going to kind of have to fight each other. And, they're not getting another shot, and I suspect, unless
poor
DJ retains. So, but yeah, it should be really interesting. I think, Formiga has also improved his boxing a lot in recent years, but I'm still it will be a question of how much kind of Pettis' footwork insulates him from takedown attempts. And I think in this case, I think quite a lot. I think I favor him relatively strongly. I think we saw against Benavidez, he was able to hit takedowns, but it was pretty hard for him to keep. It was pretty hard for him to keep hold of Pettis, and he also had to keep a pace which I think Formiga just can't.
Yes, Sergio seems to be like a direct answer to the questions that we've been asking about his big brother for so long, which is maybe the reason that when somebody does start out wrestling you, that's when you lose, is not because you need to become much, much better at wrestling. I mean, obviously that would help, but that's sort of the equivalent of fighting Ronda Rousey and saying, I trained my armbar defense really hard. Not being there for the takedown has already, I think, proven more effective for Sergio, as we saw in that Benavidez fight. It was a lot of work to get it in his hips. And Formiga has that. And Formiga has that terrifying ability to just teleport to your back, even when you think you've defended the takedown, that kind of stuff. But for all the time he spends on the feet, and for all the improvements he's made to his own boxing, he is very largely a counter striker. And Sergio strikes me as a particularly difficult opponent for that kind of counter striker to fight. John Moraga hit him with some counter combos and pushed him back after he was landing and everything. Even that didn't work out for John. Jussier is much more of a one shot at a time counter striker, one big reactive takedown, counter attack, that kind of thing. I feel like, that's the kind of stuff that the stuff Sergio does is the stuff that Anthony could have used all these years, being able to just probe and touch and create openings and force the opponent to make the first move. He is capable of that with that good jab, excellent right hand. Defense is looking better and better, everywhere really. So,
yeah, he's one of the things is that it's not really a tragedy, but it's just one of those little ironies is that Pettis the elder is a phenomenal athlete who's never, had to learn how to be a particularly great technician, whereas Sergio is an incredibly impressive technician who you're just I suspect your athleticism will always hinder you from reaching the top.
Yeah. a really, really great, well-schooled, well-put-together, intelligent fighter who nonetheless seems to have a really hard ceiling above him. So, yeah, but, it's fun to watch him try to overcome it. Banking on picking Sergio Pettis there, both of us, that's really all there is to this card, folks. Like, trust me, I wish there was more. I wish we'd had to do an episode last week and then gone through the heartbreak of having, 50% of the fights we chose to discuss being canceled. Or one of the fights we discussed being made the main event because one of the main event fighters got injured or something. Nonetheless, Nurmagomedov McGregor is the shit we all came here to see. And hopefully our discussion added a little depth to it, but really all you need to know is two of the most dominant fighters with sort of diametrically opposed styles of fighting are going to take one another on. And it should be very, very interesting.
Biggest MMA fight of the year, maybe the biggest of all time. I think it probably will be, to be honest.
Yeah, it very well could be. So, all right, that's it for this episode of Heavy Hands. We hope you guys enjoyed that. I just want to repeat, we said at the top of the episode, this is the first episode that'll be on the Conor Ruebusch YouTube channel, but you should keep that channel in mind because on the night of UFC 229, I think I'm going to be live casting on that YouTube channel. Pat and I did this once way back for, I think, Holloway versus Charles Oliveira. We did a live cast and it was a lot of fun. Very mentally taxing to do a whole card. I'm not sure how much of it I'm going to do, but if you find this episode of Heavy Hands on YouTube, that channel will have a live cast during 229 where you can sync up your pay-per-view with mine, and I'll try to break things down, answer questions, so on and so forth. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Also, keep an eye out for the 2 articles I am anticipating having out this week. Essentially, the fundamental question of this matchup analyzed. Conor and Khabib are both incredibly dominant over the vast majority of their opponents. How do they do it, and what does that mean for this matchup? So I'll be doing an article on each guy asking that question, more or less. What about you, man? You got anything coming out this week?
Nope. So, got the previews coming out, so should be going a bit further in depth on Conor and Khabib and the 2 Tonys going at it. Other than that, still going to be looking to do my kind of breakdown of some of the UFC's media strategies and what they're doing in the UK in particular, and seeing if they can beat out Bellator's amazing Peppa Pig strategy. With Callum McCarthy hopefully, and so keep a lookout for that.
Nice.
And
all right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Find us on social media. First of all, find all of that stuff on bloodyelbow.com, our various pieces of writing and whatnot. Find us on social media. Twitter is almost always the best place. You can find Phil on there at Evil Greg Jackson. And my handle is at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. And we hope it's exciting. We hope it's as thrilling and as fascinating as we made it out to be. And we will catch you guys next week to talk about the results and more. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.
Now that was a smooth ass outro.